Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is a fun one that I'm actually really excited about. This is adult fantasy book recommendations for beginners. So I think that a lot of readers have kind of dabbled in subgenres of fantasy from time to time if they're interested in fantasy at all. But I think sometimes if you are new to adult fantasy, it can feel a little overwhelming and maybe you're not sure of where you should go. What is a good book for a beginner? So a list of books that I have here I think would be great for anyone who is new to adult fantasy, whether you have read fantasy as a young adult or wherever. I think you could jump into any of these. They're very approachable in their writing style. Their plots are meant to be captivating right from the get-go, and the characters are really fully fleshed out and they help you really connect and bond with them and makes you want to follow them along in their journey. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first book that I have to recommend is an author who you're probably not surprised at all. If you know fantasy, if you've heard fantasy, you've heard this man's name. And I'm going to recommend Brandon Sanderson. Now, I think that most of the time when people recommend Brandon Sanderson for beginner book recs, they typically will recommend Mistborn, which is also a very good starting point. I think there are several places where you could start with Brandon Sanderson's books. You could do Mistborn, you could do Tress of the Emerald Sea, you could do Warbreaker. I feel like all three of those would be excellent entry points to Brandon Sanderson's work or to a beginning fantasy reader. Tress has a very cozy, kind of quirky vibe where you follow a female protagonist. Mistborn follows a group of thieves who are involved in a heist. They have kind of younger characters, and that one is also fantastic. Warbreaker follows mostly two women, and it has a very unique magic system that is very easy to understand while at the same time just being super awesome and something that I haven't really heard or seen before. So, however, I personally feel like, as someone who has read a lot of Brandon's books, mostly in preparation to get to this book here, which is a very thick, chunky book. It's about 1,200 pages. I have put off reading this book for years. I just barely read it a few months ago. I've read a large amount of Brandon's books. I don't feel like, me personally, you can disagree, Brandon himself disagrees and doesn't say start with this. I personally feel like you could start with this. I think the writing is very engaging, it's very simple, it's very easy to get into. I don't think the magic system or the fantasy world is too complicated. There is very little info dumping here. This has great characters that are easy to connect to. Their story is very compelling. I think that this is really a great book if you want to start reading Brandon Sanderson, and if you are okay with the length. I think that is really the only thing that may be intimidating about this, because personally I think it's his best work. And you know, there are some books of his that I really don't love recommending because I think sometimes they can be a little, the humor just isn't to my taste or my style. But this book, the characters, the world, the plot was fantastic. I love the magic system. I think it's super unique. It's not hard to understand at all, and I recommend this for beginners. The basic plot is you are following 3, maybe 4 main characters, so you do have varying different points of view in here. We have a surgeon who has turned into a warrior who has fallen upon very hard times and is almost at the point where he doesn't want to exist or live anymore. And we get to see his story, how he got there and where he's going and things like that. We get to see a young woman who is trying to save her family from financial ruin, but she has a very dark past and some mysteries that she's trying to keep hidden, and she is not being entirely truthful. She's being very deceptive. And then we have another man who is a hero. He is a general, and he was this extremely powerful warrior, and he's dealing with some things that involve the future that he is very afraid of, while at the same time he's losing his love of battle. So we're following these people on a journey, and there is obviously war, there are magical creatures in here, there are, you know, all kinds of things in here that are fascinating if you like magic and fantasy. Obviously you do, or you're not watching this video. But the heart of this book is the characters, and I love it. I think it's very approachable for a beginner, and I recommend it. Okay, another book that I would recommend for a beginning fantasy reader is Wolfskin by Juliet Meyer. So Juliet Meyer is a very accomplished writer. She has a lot of books under her belt, and a lot of them exist in the Seven Waters universe. This book is part of a duology. This one particularly follows 2 main characters that are men. We have Ivan, who lives in the Norse area. This book is basically about like Viking time period type of setting. and his biggest dream in life is to be this great warrior, a wolfskin, so he can wear this wolfskin essentially and have glory as a warrior. That's the thing that he has spent his whole life working towards, and that's his ultimate goal. He ends up meeting this young boy when he is also a young boy who comes to his island, and they form a bond that is almost unbreakable and could be the undoing of Ivan and could get very, very dark. They embark on a journey to essentially colonize this other island where they have heard that there are great things in store for their people. And when they get there, they see that it is largely uninhabited and bad things start happening to the people who are there. And Ivan suspects that his essential brother, adopted brother, may be at the root of it, but he feels like he can't do anything because of a blood oath that he made with him when they were children. This one has a really beautiful romantic subplot in here. I think this would appeal to both men and women. I love this book so much. I think the fantasy in here is beautiful and ethereal, and I love these characters, and Ivan is one of my favorite heroes. He is just so determined to do what is right at whatever cost that it is. Like, his sense of honor is beautiful. I thought the plot was very engaging. There are some pretty dark things that happen in here, but it was one of the most compelling books that I've read in a long time, and I freaking adore it. Okay, so now this book I think would really appeal to somebody who likes contemporary or an urban fantasy, because that's basically what this is. This is set in a fantastical world that is very similar to something like Japan is based on this island called Kikon, or Keikon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I apologize. And it's basically set in a time when war has stopped happening, but there are these clans of people, of families, and they have the ability to have magic, strength, powers, speed, fighting, things like that through Jade that they wear and collect and win through battles. We follow this family of 4 siblings as they are trying to keep their clan at the height of its power and to not be overtaken, and a lot of essentially political machinations that happen with a rival clan that could be the demise of their clan. This book is pretty bloody, it is brutal, and it is so compelling. I could not stop reading this. This is one of my favorite books and series of all time. The family in here, I love every single person of them. I think the characters in this book are incredible. They make some of the worst decisions possible, but it also feels like they had no other choice, and I love watching them bond and have trials and heal and overcome and fail as a family, and this found family unit too. I think this is pretty fast-paced. I really, really love pretty much everything about this, and if you are brand new to fantasy and you're not ready to dive into something that is a high fantasy, which is like its own complete world, I think this would be more approachable because it feels very urban. There are things about this that are very reminiscent of our life today. So it's fantastic. I love it. Would recommend this to any beginner fantasy reader. Okay, the next book that I have to recommend is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. So this is a very cozy, very beautiful fantasy book that has a fairly strong romantic subplot in here. It follows Emily Wilde, who is the foremost authority on fairies of her time, and she is doing something groundbreaking where she is writing an encyclopedia of fairies. She has come to this place to explore and discover things about fairies, and she's on the cusp of a major discovery of this dark, powerful fae being when her academic rival, our hero of the book, comes into the picture, and they sort of start rivaling and trying to beat one another to find the answers to this, and it was just beautiful. I love this. I feel like if you really liked the Spiderwick Chronicles as a kid, I think you would love this too. Emily Wilde is a fantastic character. I thought the plot of this was very fun. It did have cozy but also some kind of unsettling vibes in this, and I just enjoyed it, and I think this would be perfect for anybody who is new to fantasy books. Okay, the next book that I have to recommend is Bryony and Roses by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher is such an accomplished author, and she has written some of my all-time favorite books. This is definitely one of them. This is a very short Beauty and the Beast inspired retelling that has so many things about it that are familiar to us with the story of Beauty and the Beast that it feels just familiar enough to get us invested in the world and to get invested in the story. It's familiar, it gets us hooked right away, while at the same time having some twists and some unique things about this that are so different and kind of unexpected that it makes you feel like, Wow, that's clever. So I loved this book. It has a pretty subtle but also strong romance in here. And I just really love these characters. It begins as typical for a Beauty and the Beast, where our heroine ends up caught in a snowstorm. She goes into this magical castle and she finds, you know, a beast and occupants in the castle and roses that are growing everywhere, and she can't figure out why. So this book was so fun. It's very short. If you like fairy tale retellings, if you like Beauty and the Beast, I would highly recommend this because it is a great time. Okay, the next book that I want to recommend is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This book feels a little bit like historical fiction. This one is also based sort of around Viking here as well. The writing style feels a little bit ancient in a way, not necessarily ancient, but it does feel a little bit like older, like a text that you would expect to get. Like there's a gravity to the prose in here that really fits the time and the characters. So if you like historical books of any kind, even though this is like not even based in history at all, it still kind of has that feel. I think you would like this. I think you would love this. It follows 3 characters. We have 2 women and a thrall who are all on different journeys. So we follow 3 different points of view. And their stories don't really converge that much. We're just following them all individually. We have a woman who is a warrior and she is intent on this path to glory. We have a thrall who is seeking vengeance. And we have a woman, my favorite, Orca, who is also on a quest for redemption and revenge and to, you know, confront all these dangers and hopefully get her son back. This book has some of the most interesting characters that I've read in a really long time, and I also want to say that Orca, the woman I just mentioned, she is one of the best women written in fantasy that I've ever read. She doesn't ever lean into stereotypes. She does things that are unconventional. She is this fantastic female main character that we typically don't get to see. She can be both strong and soft. She's very multifaceted. She really is the star of this book and the main reason why I love it. The plot of this is pretty fast-paced. There are some really great action scenes in here that can be extremely brutal and bloody. There are some magical creatures in here that you haven't seen before, including like ice spiders. I just really, really loved this, and the ending was fantastic. This is part of a series. There are 2 books out right now. The 3rd book comes out this October. Next book that I want to recommend is Children of Gods and Fighting Men. I read this earlier this year, and I do want to say and give a special thank you to Polly, who is a viewer of this channel and a reviewer herself, because she sent me this book that I had not heard of until she did that. So I read this earlier this year when I was taking a break from making content. This is a beautiful fantasy book where we follow mostly 2 women. It is set around the 10th century in Ireland, so it has some Celtic mythology in here that is very fun and unique and really beautifully well done in here. We follow these 2 women who both have magical powers that are kind of forbidden and have granted them very long life. And a lot of this book is them, sort of the political machinations of them striving to overcome roadblocks in their way for being women at the time when they are. There is a romantic subplot in here which is really beautifully well done. I think the characters are so interesting and so multifaceted and so real. I loved specifically one of the female main characters in here who, while not entirely villainous, she is absolutely not good either, and I found her journey to just be very, very compelling. I think the writing style in here is very clean and very clear, and also kind of has a little bit of, not necessarily archaic, I can't really think of a good word to describe it. It doesn't feel overly modern. It feels very suitable to the time, has a bit of that gravity to it that I really like in my historical fantasy, which I think this is what this mostly feels like. It feels mostly like a historical fiction with some fantasy elements in it. It has rich Irish history in here. Thing that I really loved about this specifically was watching these 2 women really strive and be able to live in a way that felt true to them, while most of their society at the time gave them very little options. So I really enjoyed this book, and I can't wait to read book 2, and I think this would be a great one for a beginning fantasy reader. Okay, the next one that I want to recommend is When Among Crows. This is a very short fantasy novella that is based in Slavic folklore by Veronica Roth. It has a really beautiful, clean and clear writing style that is very descriptive as far as some of the scenes that get us into how the characters may feel. I really think that the mythology in here was used in a great way. We start off meeting some of these fantasy creatures that seem very, very dangerous and very scary, and then we're put into more of an urban setting where those fantasy creatures are also interacting with these people. And the basic gist of this one is that our main characters are on a journey to meet Baba Yaga, and they have to make deals and make trades and deal with magical creatures to meet her and get the answer that they are seeking. So this is very short, but it was very fun, and I really love the fantasy creatures in here, and it's a different take on fantasy that I think we typically see. Slavic folklore is so interesting and so unique, and it was perfectly executed here. Next book that I want to recommend is I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle. Peter S. Beagle is known for writing The Last Unicorn, and I really love the style that he has that feels very whimsical while also kind of just bridging the gap between whimsical, cozy, and dark. And I think that he caught that really well in here. This is basically about our main character who wants to be called Robert, who inherits his father's dragon exterminating business when his father passes away, much to his chagrin. He doesn't want to be exterminating dragons. He finds them fascinating. He feels a kinship with them. He doesn't like killing them. And this is a world where dragons are anywhere from big, hulking, scary monsters to teeny tiny dragons who are about the size of mice. There's a pretty funny scene in here when the princess ends up, climbing up on a chair to evade these tiny little dragons who are after her. So Robert ends up getting hired to go and exterminate this castle of dragons in anticipation of a prince coming there. He ends up meeting the princess and the prince, and they both hire him to go on a separate quest to take down this big dragon. And in doing so, that is really the quest of the story. So I really love this. I thought it was very inventive. I think the writing style is really approachable. It's quite short. It was engaging. I had a good time with this one, and I think it would be a great one for anyone new to fantasy. Okay, and the last book that I want to recommend is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters. This is a fantastic adult fantasy book that has a lot of the same vibes that Black Panther does, but meeting Game of Thrones in the way that it is very brutal. This book has a ton of action sequences and a lot of battle scenes, so if that's something that you like in your books, I think you would really enjoy this. This has a strong revenge plot. We follow our main character, Tao, who is destined to be a warrior and just to have his whole life be dedicated to fighting and war. This kingdom that they live in is basically in this never-ending war. And the mythology of this is we have for every 1,000 women, they can attain these certain magical powers, and for 1 in every 100 men, they can have extreme strength and power and things like that. So magical powers are kind of rare to come by the women, and I loved seeing the women characters in this specifically. But Tao ends up on this journey of revenge when all that he really wanted was to settle down with the girl that he loves and marry her. He didn't want to have anything to do with war. Things happen that put him on the path where he has to go and seek vengeance. So this whole book is basically him in a revenge story, so if you like that thing, I think you would really enjoy this. I really liked his character. I thought he was really fun. I think this is very fast-paced, very engaging, and I would highly recommend the audiobook. The audiobook narrator does a fantastic job with this one, so. Alright, there you have it. Those are my top 10 recommendations for beginner adult fantasy books. Please let me know if you have a book that you would like to add to this list, and I'll see y'all in my next video.